Chosen one, the first time you died, you were 7 years old and you didn't have a word for it. You were standing in the backyard of your grandmother's house, the one with the fig tree that leaned so far sideways it looked like it was trying to hear something the ground was saying. It was summer, the kind of summer that gets into your ears and stays there. Cicadas and heat and the smell of something sweet rotting in the grass. You had been running from what you no longer remember, and then you stopped, and something in the sky above you opened, and you went through it without moving your feet. That's the only way to describe it. You went somewhere and your body stayed. The fig tree was still there. Your sandals were still on your feet, but you were not behind your eyes anymore. You were behind everything. You could feel the weight of the air like a second skin around every object in the yard. The plastic lawn chair, the rusted lid of the tin can your grandmother used to collect rainwater, the cat sleeping in the shadow of the fence, its ribs rising and falling with a patience that seemed geological. You felt all of it, the way you feel your own heartbeat, not as something separate, but as something you are. You came back 3 seconds later or 3 years later. There is no way to tell. Your grandmother called you inside for lunch and you went, and you didn't say anything because there were no words and there was no reason to say them, and some part of you understood already that if you tried to explain, the thing itself would dissolve. So you ate your food and you went to bed that night and you grew up. You got louder, you got a little meaner, the way children do when the world starts insisting they choose a shape. You forgot what happened under the fig tree. You forgot it the way you forget a dream, not all at once, but steadily, the way water forgets it was ice. Here's what they didn't tell you about being chosen. Here's what the books leave out, and the teachers never mention, and even the ones who've been through it themselves can rarely say clearly. It doesn't feel like being selected. It feels like being undone. There is no golden light, no voice from the sky, no moment where the universe taps you on the shoulder and says, you, yes you, I've got something special for you. What happens is more like the ground falls out. What happens is more like a door opens in a wall you never knew was a wall, and the wind that comes through is cold and absolutely familiar, like the wind has been blowing through you your entire life and you've only just begun to feel it. The veil, and people use this word without knowing what it costs, is not a curtain. It's not something draped between you and reality that gets lifted like a reveal at a magic show. The veil is you. It is the story you assembled over years and years of living in a world that required you to function, to make choices, to tell a continuous narrative that began with your name and ended with your death. The veil is the version of you that was built for survival. It is not evil. It is not wrong. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It kept you moving through grocery stores and conversations and years of quiet, ordinary suffering without completely flying apart at the seams. You owe it something like gratitude. But the veil is also a wall. And what's on the other side of the wall is not heaven or enlightenment or peace, not yet, not immediately. What's on the other side is just more of you. The part of you that was there before the story started. The part that watched from underneath while you learned your name, learned your family's disappointments, learned which version of yourself was safe to show and which had to be kept somewhere dark and quiet. The part that has been waiting with the patience of the cat in the shadow of the fence. When you died the first time, at 7, that veil thinned. That's the clinical way to say it. The mystical way is you touched something real. The honest way is you were briefly, terrifyingly, mercifully not the character you'd been assigned. You were not the child of your parents, the student in your school, the kid with the name they gave you. You were whatever is underneath all that. And it looked at the fig tree and felt the weight of the summer air and understood that everything was made of the same thing and that the same thing was conscious and that it was looking at itself. They don't know this about you. That's the thing. The people who call you the chosen one, if anyone does, if that is the word they use for what you've become, they look at your clarity and they think it came from study, from discipline, from some quality of character that makes you more deserving than the rest. They think you earned this. They think you got here by being good or being brave or being diligent or being loved correctly by the universe. They have constructed a story about you the way stories always get constructed, which is to say they started with the ending and worked backwards to make it inevitable. What they don't know is that you've died before, more than once, in different rooms at different ages, in ways that left no mark on your body but restructured everything underneath. They don't know about the hospital room when you were 19. The winter that was not really about the cold, the relationship that took something essential with it when it ended and you sat in your car in a parking lot for 2 hours, just breathing because breathing was the only thing that still made sense. They don't know about the morning you woke up and genuinely could not find yourself. Not depression, or not only depression, something more specific than that. The self you'd been using had gone offline and you were sitting in the husk of it, trying to figure out how to fake being alive until being alive became real again. Each of those deaths thinned the veil a little more. Each one took something from the structure, took a belief, took a fixed point, took a certainty you'd been using as a load-bearing wall without knowing it was load-bearing until it was gone and the ceiling came down. And each time the ceiling came down, you discovered that there was no ceiling. That what you'd been calling the ceiling was just another layer of floor, and below it was more room, more light, more of whatever you actually are when you stop being what you've been told to be. This is not a comfortable process. Let's be precise about that. Let's not make it sound like a spa. The death of the self, even the partial, provisional, survivable kind, is violent in its way. It is the feeling of your hands going through something you thought was solid. It is standing in your own life and not recognizing it. It is the peculiar vertigo of being present for your own unraveling and having to go on doing the dishes, going on answering emails, going on being a person in the world while some underground version of you is screaming or laughing or weeping or all three at once in a language that doesn't have an alphabet yet. And then it settles. Not all at once, not forever, but the floor comes back, and the floor is different. The floor is lower, which is to say deeper, which is to say closer to whatever is actually holding everything up. You stand on it and it feels more real than the one before it. You feel less like a character and more like whatever is running the character. The fiction is still there. You still have your name, your history, your preferences, your fears. But now there is some part of you that is watching the fiction from slightly outside of it, with something close to tenderness. The way you might watch a child play a game with total conviction, knowing you're not going to break the spell, but also knowing you could. The Chosen One mythology gets this wrong in almost every version. In the stories, the Chosen One is chosen because of what they have: a power, a destiny, a bloodline, a prophecy spoken before their birth. The choosing is additive. Something is given, conferred, installed. The Chosen One becomes more than ordinary through a process of gaining. What actually happens is the opposite. The veil lifts not because something is added, but because something is removed. And what is removed is precious. It is the precious thing you built to survive. The armor you painted to look like skin, the smile that you practiced until it felt natural, the opinions you adopted because the people around you held them with such certainty that uncertainty felt like a character flaw. The version of yourself that was diplomatic about your own needs, that learned to need less, that got very good at explaining why actually things were fine. All of it goes, not all at once, over years, over deaths, over moments in backyards and hospital rooms and parking lots and kitchen floors and long walks alone in the dark, that were really a conversation you were having with something that had no voice yet, something that communicated in sensation and coincidence and the particular quality of silence that descends sometimes in the middle of ordinary life and asks you gently, devastatingly, if you're actually there. And slowly, through the removals, what's left is something that doesn't have a good name. Call it awareness, call it presence, call it the watcher, call it God if that word has room for you, or soul if that one fits better, or just call it what it is, the part of you that was never born and will never die, watching the rest of you live with a patience and a tenderness that would break your heart if you let it, which you do, eventually, because by the time you get here, the heart has already been broken so many times that breaking has become a kind of opening. This is why the Chosen One is always strange, always slightly apart, always looking at the room from a distance that isn't rudeness or arrogance, but something more like the distance you get when you've stood on both sides of the mirror. They have a quality of stillness that people read as confidence or wisdom or strength, and it is none of those things exactly, or it is all of them, but as byproducts, as symptoms of the real thing, which is simply that they have died and come back enough times that the fear of dying has changed shape. It is still there, let's not pretend it isn't, that would be its own kind of veil, but it has become something navigable, something that can be sat with, something that can be looked at directly without looking away. The knowledge that comes after the veil lifts is not dramatic. This is the other thing the stories get wrong. There is no download, no sudden omniscience, no moment where you close your eyes and open them and see the future written in the structure of things. What there is something more modest and more devastating. You see what's actually here. You see it without the filter of what you needed it to be. You see the person in front of you not through the story you've built about them, but as they are, which is to say as something incredibly specific and incredibly temporary and entirely worth loving. You see your own suffering not as evidence that something has gone wrong, but as the precise instrument that made you porous, that wore down the walls, that let the light in through the places that got broken. You see the world without the noise of your constant narration about it. And what the world looks like without that noise is quiet, vast, and somehow impossibly fine. Not fine in the way people say fine when they mean the opposite. Fine in the old sense. Fine like a line drawn with absolute precision, fine like a piece of something made with complete attention. The world is fine in that it is finished, complete, not going somewhere, not waiting to become what it should be, already and entirely what it is. And you are part of it in the same way your heartbeat is part of you, not separate, not added, not an afterthought, intrinsic. The people who watch you move through the world now see something they can't quite name. They say you have a gift. They say you have a calling. They say you were born for this, whatever this is, the healing, the teaching, the holding space, the showing up in the rooms where people are breaking and sitting with them in the break without flinching, without rushing to fix what doesn't want to be fixed, without filling the silence with something smaller than what the silence is asking for. And you don't correct them because they're not entirely wrong. You were born for this, but you were also remade for it. Several times, in the quiet, without witnesses, in the moments no one recorded and no one will celebrate, and that would look, from the outside, like nothing more than a person surviving, just a person, in a car in a parking lot, or standing in a backyard in summer, or lying on a floor somewhere in the middle of the night with nothing left to hold on to except the basic animal fact of still being alive. Those were the moments of choosing, not chosen, choosing, the active, continuous tense. Every time the ground fell out and you chose, however badly and however slowly and however unwillingly, to go through the falling rather than fight it. Every time the ceiling came down and you stayed in the rubble long enough to discover there was something solid below it. Every time the veil thinned and you resisted the urge to pull it back into place, to stitch yourself back into the shape that everyone recognized, to perform recovery instead of actually changing. The choosing never ends. This is also something they get wrong. The chosen one in the stories is chosen once. The battle is fought, the dragon is slain, the darkness is defeated, and the hero goes home to something that now makes sense. But the actual life, the life lived after the first death and the second death and the fifth and the 12th, the actual life is not an arrival. It is a continuous practice of choosing to be what the dying revealed, rather than reverting to what the living required. There are days you revert. There are weeks. There are whole seasons where you find yourself back inside the veil, back inside the tight, small story, moving through your life like a person in a house with all the windows painted over, getting through it, managing it, functioning perfectly, and feeling nothing essential. And then something breaks. An unexpected grief, a moment of beauty so specific it goes straight through the armor, a conversation that somehow gets under all the defenses and says the thing that needed saying, or asks the question that needed asking, and the windows clear, and the air comes back, and you remember. You remember what you are when you're not being what you've been. You remember the fig tree and the summer wait and the cat in the fence's shadow and the sense of everything being made of the same thing that was looking at itself. And it's not a memory from childhood. It's a memory from underneath time. It's the kind of memory that isn't stored in the brain, but in something older and less fragile. The body, the breath, the space behind thought that is always quiet no matter how loud everything else gets. That space. That's the veil's other side. That's what all the dying was for. Not some destination, not some elevated state you inhabit permanently like a piece of real estate. Just access. Just the knowledge that it's there and you've been there and you can get back. That the ground exists below the ground you're standing on, and below that ground another one, and that none of them is the last, and that you are somehow all of them simultaneously, the child in the backyard and the person in the parking lot and the one who's here now, in this body, in this year, living this particular stretch of the human story with as much presence as you can manage on any given day. The ones who need what you carry will find you. They already are finding you, have always been finding you, because what you carry is not yours to give. It is theirs to recognize. They recognize it because they have a veil too, and it is thinning, and the thinning is terrifying, and they need to see someone standing on the other side of it who is still standing, who is still warm, who is not performing transcendence but actually living the awkward, inconvenient, beautiful consequence of having gone through the dying and come back, knowing something they didn't know before. What they need from you is not wisdom exactly. Not technique, not a system. What they need is evidence. They need to see that the dying doesn't kill you, that the loss of the false self does not leave you empty, that what remains when the veil lifts is not less than what was there before, but more present, more honest, more available to the actual texture of experience, the good and the unbearable and the strange, the fig tree and the cat and the weight of summer air and the long silence of the parking lot and the morning that comes after every kind of night. You are the evidence. You have always been the evidence, not because you were chosen before you were born or marked by some celestial authority or given powers that set you apart from the rest of the human story, but because you died, because you chose to go through it. Because every time the ground fell out, you went through the falling rather than stopping the fall. And every time you came back up, there was less between you and what is actually real. And what is actually real turned out to be something you could live in. What they didn't know is that you've died before. That's how your veil got lifted. Not by grace extended to the deserving, by the ordinary, extraordinary violence of being a consciousness inside a life, of losing things, of coming apart, of sitting in the rubble long enough to find the foundation. The veil didn't lift because you were ready. The veil lifted because the dying was precise, because it took exactly what needed to go, because underneath all the taking you were still there, patient as the cat, still as the air before the cicadas begin, present in the way that only things that have been through the deepest kind of absent can be present. They call you the chosen one. Let them. Hold the phrase loosely. Know what it actually means. Know that the choosing was yours, done in rooms no one saw, on floors you got up from, in winters you survived without anyone knowing how close it was. Know that every death made you more available to this moment and this person and this life that keeps insisting on being exactly what it is, precise and temporary and fine, fine in the old sense, fine like something made with complete attention, fine like a line drawn steady by a hand that has learned not to shake from being shaken so many times. You are here. The veil is up. Begin.